1 second, I'm gonna, oh, wait.
Oh,
I lied.
yeah.
It is working.
Okay.
Haha. Awesome. Okay, so let's just set up Skype the way that I want it here. And actually, while I was waiting to get you on the call, I did a little bit of, I guess, YouTube demoing of your explosion demo for our
Okay.
audience. I thought it might be interesting for them to see, before we talked, I guess what goes into sound manufacturing design from sort of start to finish for video games. It's something that I don't know if a lot of people appreciate. At least when it
Right.
comes to some of the games that we love and play a lot have quite a lot of different sound effects in them. So they're very detailed, and it's something that I'm really excited to talk to you about today. So thank you so much for joining us. For everyone else, you are now seeing and hearing from Ray Gould. Ray is behind soundkamera, which I guess is your sort of business studio. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Excellent. And I know that you're based out of Ottawa, correct?
that's correct. Yeah.
Excellent. So it's really great to talk to you today. One of the ways that I sort of stumbled across Ray, for those of you who might be watching, we have interviewed the team behind Bendy Machine quite extensively. So Mike Mood, obviously Meatley is someone who we've talked to quite a bit, and Ray has actually joined their team to help with some of the more I'll say atmospheric elements. So we've talked to people about the visual elements, we've talked to people about the crazy community building that goes behind the project, and now I think that we're kind of coming somewhat full circle when it comes to Bendy, talking to the man
Right.
behind the sound, because
Right.
it's a huge part of that game. So blah, blah, blah. Thank you for joining us in the GameDev Cafe. I guess I'd love to start, Ray. I've done probably a very poor job of introducing you and what you do. But why don't you tell me, in your own words, sort of what's your title as far as the industry is concerned, and what does that really mean when it comes to your role in making games or film or anything else?
Right. I would call myself a sound designer, music composer. Um, Sound design is a kind of a funny term, and not everyone agrees on it even. But I think everybody knows what an audio clip is, and if they play something like in iTunes or whatever, they understand that, well, this is an audio file. Sound design is how you decide what audio clips are going to play, and probably the least understood is how they're being played. And that's one of my biggest interests in doing game sound. When you're working sound for a film, let's say, you have a timeline, and your main goal is to synchronize the sound clip to particular events in the film.
Right.
And a lot of times we do like lots of different sounds, and then it always comes out as one stereo sound at the end.
Oh, okay.
But it might take 10 or 20 or even 100 sounds to make the sound of, say, a robot or a spaceship. In a game, designing the sounds with the same ideas, but then they also have to be interactive, and you have to keep. You can't just bounce it all down to a single audio clip at that point.
I see.
So I would say designing sound has to do with that. It also has to do with the general aesthetic. What sounds are you going to hear and what sounds are you not going to hear?
Right.
I think one thing that's kind of nice about the sound design is if you've ever seen the title in a set designer, and you think I think that's a lot more relatable to a lot of people, is that that they decided that there was going to be a bed in that room, and they decided that it would be this type of a lamp. People can kind of understand that, but I think there's been a notion that for sound, well, there's a visual and there's an obvious sound that goes with it, but there's actually it's a lot more flexible than that. So I don't know if that.
That's actually pretty good. No, that's actually a pretty good description, especially for people who, again, I don't think I want to draw a distinction just quickly off the bat between sounds and music as well. So a lot of people think it's all kind of one lumped sum, but the soundtrack is completely different from, as you say, some of these cued effects and sort of atmospheric elements that are going to make things maybe feel more real, or as you say, by layering sounds on, you maybe make a sound that doesn't actually exist sound like it really does in real life. Very cool. Is this kind of your shtick? Like, is this something that you've always been interested in ever since you were little, loved making weird sounds in music? Or did you fall into this? I'm really interested in how someone, grows up to become a sound designer.
Right. Right. Well, I would say that I have always loved sound, and I think that's just it's a personal thing. Like some people really relate to, my taste buds are not that great. So when someone's talking about this amazing type of food, I might kind of go, it's just. But a sound could really like move me emotionally.
I see.
I think that's another kind of like big topic, which I'll try go into too much, but I think that the function of sound, that sound can affect us emotionally, is something that it works on us on a subconscious level. So
Yes.
it's not so people will tend to say, oh, sound's not that important, and it's because it is so important. It's like saying, well, breathing isn't that important. Well, maybe it's not like breathing, but
For some people.
for me,
Yes.
But the point is that we take it for granted, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Yes. Somewhat passive.
So,
Yes.
but in fact, it's probably how we learn how to feel about emotion, how we learn to feel about visual. So again, going back to my sound design example, that you see a truck and you have to put a sound on a truck, but depending on what you're trying to convey, is like the driver out to get you, or is it like one of your lost relatives coming home? I mean, you can make this engine. I'm a poor example, but you see the point that there's emotional connection, and with the flexibility of sound design, the way we work, we can manipulate people's emotions quite a bit with that. And I think that would be the answer to this question. That
You've always liked manipulating people.
I like to get effects out of people with sound, and I had a little tape recorder when I was a kid, and I was running around taping things. And then later on, I discovered, but I found thing had always been in the back of my mind. And when I was playing in bands and things, people would often tell me that my music was very, textual or sonic, or like I mean, I love writing. I like actual composing. I like notes and chords and scales and all that stuff. But like I'm a guitar player originally,
Nice.
and my guitar playing tends to be more about the sound quality of the guitar rather than, or at least they're equal. So sound has always been a really important part in that way. And then the second part of my answer for this is that when I went to audio school, I went to audio school in Toronto. I went to Travis.
Oh, nice.
And I had a teacher, and like most of the students there were into music. It's an urban school, so there was a lot of urban music. A lot of students showed up wanting to be hip hop. There was a lot of really great producers at the school at the time teaching. And I had one teacher that said, when you get to the post audio course, once you synchronize a sound to a gun on screen, half of you are going to totally forget music and want to just do post audio sound, and that's pretty much what happened to me. I just couldn't believe how cool it was, and but it probably reawakened something from my past, right? Like I had it as you can get to do like the sound for film, like it hadn't even really occurred to me, as stupid as that sounds, but that was really the big turning point for me.
Interesting. And would you say film is something that you always kind of wanted to get into, or was film just a natural fit when it came to people needing sounds and music?
I think the natural fit. I know that there were a lot of, I played video games at that time, but the sound was so poor, and there wasn't really much opportunity, put it that way. One game, one of my first games, I remember. I don't even remember the title of it. I played it like crazy. It was a downhill skiing game.
Oh yeah.
And when you hit the flag, the guy would go and make this funny sound when he got hurt, and people saw me playing it like I was constantly hitting the flags because I just want to keep triggering that sound.
Just hearing that.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at the game, but to me that was the fun part of the game.
Oh, that's funny.
Like where all the little sounds were. It was a horrible game, probably, like in the.
I think it might have been called Ski Free. I don't want to make any assumptions, but there was a really popular cheap free game that like everybody got to play. And it's funny that you say that because the most memorable part of that game for me was the funny sounds. The game itself wasn't that amazing, but I think you're right. Games, there's certainly more room for sound in games now in terms of the different layers, and you know, budgets I'm sure dictate a lot of what people can do with sound and how, you know, detailed that can really be. What was the first? I mean, you mentioned sort of the skiing game. What was the first video game that you recall having, like, I guess I don't want to say a sound level that you thought was good. It's not that little sound effects aren't good, but what's the first game that you remember making a real impact when it came to sound and, you know, the music for you?
Right. Well, I think the pretty much any AAA game has amazing sound. I mean, it's just like it's with films now. I mean, you just don't have bad sound anymore. It's a really known thing.
Yeah.
But I would say that playing games like the Batman Arkham series, I realized like, oh, this is just like movies.
Yeah.
And I later found out one of the games that I was playing, they did the motion capture at Game On in Montreal.
Oh, cool.
So they do the motion capture and the voice acting capture at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very tight sync.
Nice.
The emotion is like you try your best not to do this, but most people agree that there's at least a little bit of the acting when you redo the voices afterwards. So capturing at the same time is really brilliant. And I think they're kind of turning into a world leader. If they aren't already, they should be a world leader at this motion capture, voice capture.
Interesting.
That was just sort of another sort of flip, like, wow, this is just like watching a movie. Mm-hmm. In terms of the sound, the music, and orchestral and sound design and voice acting. But probably the game that really made me want to make games was Limbo. I really
great choice.
That was going back to some of the other things I've mentioned already. Like, but it's a very emotional game for me, and like it really transports me back to being a kid. Mm-hmm. In that kind of like scary, tentative, curious world. And I'd say that's probably the thing that really made me want to get involved. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In terms of actual gameplay. But then I really I don't know how many games you want me to.
As many as you like.
Land's End was another revelation.
Oh, good one. Yes, good one.
I think like it's a couple of years old now, but I saw that and. I thought it's so beautifully abstract, and the sound design is amazing.
Yeah, and the sound really makes
even though it's
that game too.
Yeah, it's probably mostly music, but the music is so sound oriented that it's hard to tell where it's an atmosphere and where it's a piece of music.
That's a good point. And I was going to say some of the games that resonate the best are the ones where you can't maybe pinpoint exactly where that break happens.
Right. Sure, yeah, and that's another thing that I really love about sound is where the music and the sound design are really linked. Really, the first I have so many examples. There's examples of that since the beginning of sound films. Mm-hmm. But and then of course early video games where they only had chip tunes to use. Every piece of music was a sound effect. Mm-hmm. And early animations like that as well. They used xylophones and drum sets to try and like make footsteps and stuff like that. So it's been going on for a really long time.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Did you find it difficult to transition from film, where you know there's sort of this like plethora of opportunity, into games where it's maybe a bit of a braver, newer world?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things about that. The first thing I would say is not so much about the industry per se, but the interactivity. Mm. But as it turns out, I was really moving towards interactivity anyway. Okay. The way I make my sounds, there's because so much how do I put it? They have to redo the sound. There's almost like a joke in film is that we have locked picture, and any sound person that talks about locked picture always does air quotes around locked because the video people send you a locked picture, and then a week later they'll say, "Oh, here's a new picture."
Here's another one. Yeah.
So depending on what that means on a particular film, it could mean like a lot of redoing sound.
Right.
And it causes you to like linear. Film is very linear. It's a very to speak in dev speak, it'd be very waterfall
yes.
Style. And I was already moving towards an agile style of sound design, just because it's a matter of survival. Like if I do things and I try to make them permanent, and I know that they're going to change, I'm going to really make my life hell. So it helps me.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it helps me to develop tools and samplers a lot for my sound design, not for music, but for actual like footsteps, door sounds, and things like that. And what that allows me to do is that I can whip out, like once I make the initial sound design bang in my sampler, I can do multiple variations of that as needed.
Interesting.
So all the work is up front, and then but then like once you've done that, then you can bang out episodes. So I did a series where I used all sampled footsteps,
oh, cool.
and I was doing them at I mean, I'm not bragging, but like it was pretty fast.
Yeah.
Where we actually had to like not deliver them as soon as they were done, just because we thought, well, we'll think it's so easy if we start putting them out as fast as they're done.
Won't justify our bill. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
But that is interesting. I think it mirrors a lot of what I hear from artistic and from the artistic end of game development, where in order to remain agile, you kind of do all the work up front, and then it's tweaking at that point and getting feedback and doing the back and forth.
Right.
Do you find it? Because you mentioned that you were sort of leaning towards that style, anyways. Do you find it easier now? Like, is it? I hate to use the word better. That's not really fair. But do you, for yourself, is it a more efficient and maybe more enjoyable process?
Absolutely. One of the things that's a nice little bonus to all this is that, I find like I get very art right brain, where I'm working on art, and it's very disruptive to have to do technical things when that happens. So a part of my style also is to make sure that I put my left brain technical hat, and I just spend a day being like that, and it's all crunching numbers, possibly a little bit of scripting, and optimizing files. And then the next day will be like all artistic, and now everything just works. I just in and I have an idea and I can execute it. So one of the bonuses of working this way as well is that you end up with something pure sonically, because like all you have to do is think about sound. You don't have to think about like what's my IP address and how like what channel am I on, or
all the distractions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's much more pure. Is that then is that something that you feel is a style that you've developed personally, or is this something that you see as expected sort of in the games industry?
I don't have enough industry experience to really to speak to that, but so I'm kind of out in the wilderness here. But I know that some people there's definitely people that are working this way.
It sounds very prudent, to say the least. And if it's I would dare say if there's anyone watching who's not using that sort of approach to their sound pipeline, I would certainly think it makes sense from a development standpoint. Now, I guess we'll get into some of the projects that you're working on, specifically Bendy. But going back a little bit, just to your own, I guess, education and experience when it comes to sound, do you lean heavily on any particular tools or software, or do you have sort of a whole subset? Because for game developers, there's sort of some very popular engines that tend to rise to the top. I'm not sure if it's the same with sound.
I guess the main thing for sound, whether or not you are collaborating with other sound people.
Good point.
If you're working completely itself, then all that matters is the end product. You got a sound file at the end, you can deliver it. Nobody cares how you did it.
Much nicer.
Yeah, but if you're in the if you're collaborating with other sound people, Pro Tools is probably the most standard tool. I personally, I love mixing and editing audio in Pro Tools. I hate doing it. Usually, a lot of guys use a lot of people use something else to do their designing in. You can definitely do sounds in Pro Tools, but one thing, and okay, so this is kind of an interesting thing. Pro Tools is very filmic.
Okay.
And one of the things it's great for is syncing to video. And if I'm working with not necessarily, I haven't really do that many cuts, but for instance, Bendy, if there's an animation that requires sound timing, I'll usually ask them to send me a short video. They'll do a video capture and send that to me. That works great in Pro Tools, but it's not very real time. And I find Ableton Live is probably my favorite for that.
Okay.
And Ableton Live is really great for prototyping. You can stop and start things on a dime. Nice. It has randomization, and it's almost program is like a big sampler, and it's made for live performance. Okay. So it's very reactive to whatever you do. And what I like to do now is there's a protocol called Rewire, and I rewire Ableton Live into Pro Tools. It's like a virtual patch cable.
Oh, cool.
So
okay.
So I have Pro Tools open with my video or whatever, and then I design in Live, and I stream it into Pro Tools and capture it. So it's got a very real-time feel to it, and performing sounds and that. So again, going back to what we were just talking about. So the tools that I use all the time.
Interesting.
You need a really top-end sampler. I use Contact, almost everyone does, but if there's any doubt, Contact is definitely the one to use.
Cool.
At this point, it changes all the time, but I like to use. Personally, I like to use a lot of patching tools. This is Reactor, Max SP, Pure Data, these things. It's very similar. It's actually programming, but it's visual programming.
Yes. Yes.
You don't do lines of code, little graphical objects on the screen, but you're patching together oscillators and filters and things like that. So it's like working in audio, but with be able to push objects around to get a result.
A little easier to manipulate that way. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And then I guess the last set would be, in terms of software, would be, and a lot of people are familiar with Fmod and Wise. They're both tools, and they're kind of self-explanatory. But that would be my short list of software.
Awesome, awesome. And, less for me, who probably doesn't know half of that software, but certainly there's a lot of audio folks out there. And I think there's a lot of people who are doing this on their own. I talk to a lot of independent developers. We talk to AAAs too, but a lot of independent developers who are doing all these elements of the game on their own. So they're forced to kind of pick up some lessons in audio, some lessons in sync.
Right.
This is actually a really useful list. Let's get into some of your projects. So Bendy and the Ink Machine is sort of the big one. And for those who are not familiar, we've interviewed a couple developers involved in the project already. But the coolest thing for me as an outsider observing Bendy is the insane level of community passion for this game that was there before it even came out, before anyone, people still don't really know what the story is about. That's like the funniest part to me. So there's this weird game that's become almost like a cult status legend. And you've been invited to join as, a sound designer. And this, I guess, would be somewhere around Chapter 2, Chapter 3 getting developed is when you joined. Is that right?
I was there pretty much. Well, they did a demo that I was not involved in, and immediately did all the sound for that. And once they got to that point, they realized they needed more people. When they started developing Chapter 1, my understanding of the story is that they released a demo, thinking that get that much attention, but it was just a sort of test demo. And when they started attention on that, then they decided, okay, we're going to have to flesh out a real chapter here. And so I came on at that point.
Okay, so you did chapter 1, the sound in chapter 1 then. Oh, awesome.
Yes,
okay.
yeah,
That's the only chapter, just, disclaimer, that's the only chapter that I've actually played completely through.
Okay.
I have chapter 2 and 3, they're kind of waiting for like our
Right.
lead up to Halloween. But that's awesome. So I've actually experienced your hand in the game. So
Right.
as a player, and I'm going to ask you about this in a second, but as a player, the weirdest thing about the game is the fact that it is quite quiet. It's not a game that has music playing in the background. It doesn't have sounds filling up the space for you, which is why the sounds become so important. Because when they come out, they're either shocking or strange or eerie, but they definitely put you off kilter. And it's the coolest part, in my opinion, about chapter 1. There's not really much to chapter 1. Sound is actually the biggest element, I think, for me as a player experiencing that atmosphere, that story, which is extremely minimal. So I'm curious whether the sound direction that you decided on for chapter 1 was basically dictated by what the Meatly had started with, or whether you were trying to pull in some of the classic film horror, suspense, terror, mystery, all of that sort of like classic nuance, I guess, whether you were pulling from that or whether you were pulling from the original demo. Because the original demo, I have to say, doesn't feel as spooky. It doesn't have the same level of atmosphere as everything else. So I'm just wondering how you approach that, I guess.
Right. Well, I would say that the first thing to know is the Meatly is really creative and has a lot of ideas about how he wants things. And that's really great for me. And he pretty much set the sound design art, if you would, of what was happening. And then it was really more like sounds it's funny to bring that up also is because I just remember something from chapter 1 is there was a sound that he wanted me to replace. And I tried everything and I just could not get a sound that would convince these guys that it was better. We ended up using his original sound. And it was, I don't even know what the sound was. Like I couldn't identify it. And I tried like several different things to rep. So there's a couple of sounds, jump scares that he used that we just couldn't better them. Having said that, then mainly, it was mainly replacement. For chapter 1, I took what he had. So a lot of the ideas artistically are his, and like the technical side of it is very easy for me. Not to that sounded really arrogant.
It doesn't sound arrogant when you're the man making the sound. Don't worry.
Right. Okay. It's difficult to whip up the sounds, but again, going back to what we were just talking about, once we had like the basic sounds covered, then it was a matter of exploring the more creative aspects of it. And so I think one of the things that I try to do in addition to the style that we talked about is I try and make everything original. I make everything. There's called a sound library. If your viewers are not aware, that's where you buy a commercial set of sounds, and it might be 200, it might be 20,000, depending on how much money you pay. Usually, like a way to look up sounds in like a directory.
And they're kind of pre-baked, right? Like they're pre-done.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So the best libraries, based on you're probably getting the idea by now, is that the best libraries have really generic sounds that are meant to be piled on each other.
Okay.
And so they're libraries for designers. Other libraries, there's not that many of them anymore, but they used to be. They were very, very pre-baked. And so those just were not used for games.
Right.
But for indie people, like they're awesome because it's just pull off sound, drop it in the game, works.
Yep.
But you lose a lot of control and customizability. So the other side of that is if I have time and budget, which the me very, very good with, I was allowed to create my sounds from scratch, pretty much all of them.
Wow.
For Bendy. So if there's footsteps, it's me walking in and recording myself walking on a floor.
That's cool.
If it, pretty much any sound that I was, I can't think of any that I used out of a library actually.
Wow.
I would use library sounds for placeholders, just to, and if he's asking for, I need an elevator sound, which is chapter 3. If I need this sound, I would throw out a sound to say, is this kind of what you're looking for? He'd say yes, but then I'd go out and find an elevator and record
kind of tweak
the
it
gate going back and forth. Yeah.
Neat.
So
now
yeah.
let me stop you there. Did you do that because you're just like an awesome sound designer that everyone wants to work with because you go the extra mile, or are you doing that specifically because of this project?
A bit of both. I would always do it if I have the choice. I would always do it if I have the choice, but a lot of times there isn't time or budget.
Right.
And so that's a really great way to where the library, that is my association with it. Like if you're working in the industry where you're doing car commercials and like they need it, like we're recording the voice today, they need the mix tomorrow. You just don't have time to do that stuff.
Right. So it's sort of a logistics issue in some cases, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
But just as a sound person, like I love making sound. I want it to be personalized.
That's cool.
So to a lesser extent, it doesn't happen that often. But I mean, you could literally hear a sound from one game and recognize it in another game. If you're using these libraries, you have to know that these are the libraries that everybody has. So
that's a good point.
The potential for that does happen. But I think probably mostly it's just the fact that when I see a visual, I want to create something new for that visual that's custom made for that.
Cool. And I mean, for Bendy in particular, it's such a weird aesthetic that having its own unique sound aesthetic makes a lot of sense. If it was sort of a more generic, asteroid shooter game or something like that, it might be a little easier. Right. You mentioned that you'd go out and you sort of record some of your own sounds. You're not exactly using a soundstage then, which is more film typical, but you're sort of going out into the world and just capturing anything you can. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Cool.
There's so many great tools now. I mean, you definitely lose a little bit of sound when you do that in terms of you have to use noise reduction or whatever. It's not really it's not ideal. But I found that since I've been doing that there's a freshness to the sounds that outweighs that. Yes. So if I would rather hear something that's passionate and unique to that game than something that has a quote unquote high quality of sound.
Yes.
As I mentioned, like if it's just a question of getting high quality sound, you buy a really expensive library. Well, this library recorded with quality microphones and preamps and so on. So I mean, if that's then that's how you do it. Or as you say, you'd go up to you'd rent a sound stage. And I can certainly do that. I have a game that wants budget for that. Yeah, I mean it's totally possible.
Well, it's probably a little more agile when you're not forced to do that. I know one of my favorite music artists is Bjork, and she was very well known for just taking a little sound recorder around and like, oh, here's a wave, I'm going to capture that. Here's a rock crashing, I'm going to capture that. So I think it makes a lot more sense when it comes to creating something organic or organically to do it that way. So with Bendy then, are you going to be doing sort of all the sound? Obviously you did sound for chapter 1, 2, 3 was just released. I know chapter 4 is cooking, so is this something that you're planning on hopefully continuing with?
I'm under contract with the Meatly Games, and nice. As far as I know, they renew my contract every chapter.
Nice.
So.
Here's hoping. And I know chapter 3 just came out, so this might be the question might be a little premature. Are there any other projects that you might not be able to talk about them, totally totally openly, but are there any other projects that you're working on and sort of excited to do, or anything that has unique sort of sound implementation that you're working on?
I'm working on 2 art installations
cool.
that'll be showed at the Ottawa Art Gallery this year.
Oh, awesome.
And early next year. Both those are collaborating with artists. One is a video artist, one is another sound artist.
Awesome.
Both projects use programming. So we have like both of them have three-member teams. There's a visual artist, a sound artist, and a programmer.
Oh, nice.
Sorry, in the case of the second one, she's actually a sculptor, but also a sound artist.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's more of a collaboration there. But she's using custom electronics, and I'm doing content for that and programming.
Good for the
So I'm doing
Ottawa
sound
Art Gallery
programming.
too. Yeah.
So this goes back to my idea about interactivity. Like I really like. I'm actually thinking of updating my title to be like instead of sound design for video games, just sound design for interactive media. But it's just such a mouthful. But it's actually more accurate because pretty much anything that's interactive, I'm with.
Yeah. And so it's a bit of a hard it's a hard bucket to put yourself into these days too. Because
Exactly.
everything is interactive, everything is digital. Yeah.
True.
It's interesting that you'll have branched out to a few different industries, though. I do talk to a lot of people who are strictly working in games, so it's neat to talk to someone who's bridged film, games, art, everything. And I know CGX is coming up, of course, this weekend. GameDev Cafe will, of course, be there. You will be on the VR panel, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Excellent, excellent. We've actually spoken to a few people on that panel, and then also part of the Mentors Lounge, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I can only be there for the first part of the mentor, but I'm always able to reach out. For the VR panel, I'm just starting to on a VR game with spatialized audio. So that's sort of my new buzz is to start using the actual ambisonics and binaural in a VR game.
Cool. I mean,
so
I wouldn't expect
very, very excited about that.
I was going to say, I wouldn't expect you to have lots of experience in VR, given that it's such a new field, but sound, again, is so important to that experience. I guess you wouldn't tell us even if it was happening, but it wouldn't happen to be a Bendy VR game.
No comment.
No comment, actually. I asked immediately the same thing, and his answer was not no comment. It was like, we're too busy. Mike, I appreciate the same thing. Very cool. Given that you are going to be part of the Mentors Lounge, and honestly, this talk has been great, I think, for a lot of our audience who's interested in how to get started in sound and how do you bridge some of the industries that do have a demand for sound. Are there any mentors that you yourself sort of look up to, or I hesitate to say role model, that might be a little grand, but just other sort of people doing this type of innovation in sound in the industry? Is there anyone that you look up to?
Not as I say, it's hard to name names, and the game industry is not as rigid as film. But I would say a couple of outsiders. I would say I learned a lot from Andy Farnell. He's a more of a programmer, sound designer, and he has books and things that your audience could look up. He's a real inspiration for how I work. It's all about sound his thing is about sound modeling. So you're looking at the sound's behavior. So coming back to what the very beginning thing that we were talking about is an audio clip on its own is kind of a dead thing. It's when you couple an audio file with a control source of some kind. Now you have, like, I could record the sound of a car, but if I want the car to accelerate and to slow down and to rev and things like that, this is all you're controlling the sound, those audio clips. So he's pretty much like the thought leader in that area.
Cool.
I really appreciate an experience I had. I got to sit in on Foley sessions with Andy Malcolm and Goro Koyama. They're pretty much, if for my money, they're probably two of the best Foley artists in the world. And I got to sit with them and watch them perform, and they let me perform a few sounds for a vampire movie we're working on. And if you look them up, their studio's called Footstep Studio. It's north of Toronto. Very cool. And they just did the sound for the new Blade Runner movie.
Oh wow!
I mean, they're world class and amazing people and very generous with their information. So
fantastic.
As far as like young people that are watching this, I would try and find people that are open, generous with their information, and then try and give back to that.
Awesome. Much like yourself
So,
in today's interview.
thanks.
What a segue. I mean, that's a really, honestly, a fantastic piece of advice, I think, is to seek out others. And a lot of what you've given today is almost like a bit of a guide for how to, I think, philosophically approach
Yes.
studies in sound, and then also
Right.
practically how to actually make a job out of it. Because as you
Right.
say, you're not always working with infinite budgets and infinite opportunity.
Right.
I guess you've given a lot of great advice, and this might be a big ask, but I'm wondering if there's one sort of overall piece of advice that you would give, let's say yourself, when you were much,
Right.
much younger, and the sort of advice that you have in hindsight. What would you tell someone who wants to be a sound designer or work in film and game production like yourself?
Right. Right. Yeah, I think about that a lot, and it's always hard to come up with one. So for
Probably
today,
write a book, but yeah.
yeah, for today, the one thing is going to be interested in lots of. The best sound designers I've ever heard of are never just into sound. I think I do find I run into people who are starting or are even in the industry, and they just want to talk about their tools and their process. And but the really great sound designers, like Ben Burtt would be an awesome example. If people don't know, he's for Star Wars. I mean, he's done some of the sound design
Pretty big,
in
yeah.
history. But if you talk to him, I haven't spoken to him personally, but in interviews, he always wants to talk about language and literature and things like that. And you think about how he did the sounds for R2D2, like a Wall-E.
Yeah.
He was very interested in language. And so, like, how is it that we're understanding this unique language that he created? Well, if you approach it by saying, well, you get this type of synthesizer and you use this type of programming, you're really missing a huge of it. Is that it's the inflection and how
Yes.
he approached it as a sorry about that. I mean, Ben would be much better to speak on it, but if you get a chance to Google him. But the fact that he's about a lot more than just the sound, and that will always inform and and strengthen his sound design. So that would be my one thing for today.
Excellent.
It's just be interested in as broad a number of categories of things as possible.
Interesting. And I honestly feel that that's hitting the nail on the head for the rest of us who are consuming the sound. What we love about it isn't the sound, the technical nature of it, the fact that you maybe made it sound like something it was supposed to. It's, as you say, the timing and the tie-ins, the strange illusions that those sounds make to other things in our lives, whether it's another sound, a voice, a word, whatever it may be.
Right.
I think that that's an excellent point. And I will say, the sound designers who I've spoken with, you're not the first, but you're one of the few.
Right.
I think the mark in the successful ones I've spoken with is that they do take a deeper interest beyond whatever their level of contribution is to a project. They want to know how their level is going to affect every level beyond. And that's where you get that harmony.
Absolutely.
That's where you get that, as I said, atmospheric impression from a project. Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Ray. This has been totally fascinating. I don't know that much about audio tools, but I'm kind of curious to go and explore now. And I know that there's I have a lot of amateur friends who will gladly take me through the training loops. You did mention Trebas as sort of an institute that you attended. Do you, just sort of as a last thought, do you have any websites or anywhere that you frequent online in terms of doing research or getting information about audio? You've mentioned a few people in our interview who we can link to today. I'm just wondering if there's any blogs or websites in general as well.
Sounddesign.org is
Nice.
one I look at a lot. Create Digital Music is another one I look at all the time. I think those two would give anyone lots to do.
Perfect. And we'll make sure that they're
blogging.
I was going to say, we'll make sure that they're linked up as well. Awesome. I am not going to eat up any more of your time today because I know we've stolen a lot of it, but this has been really insightful. I'm also really excited that you're going to be at CGX.
Right.
As you may or may not know, but for the audience's benefit too, GameDev Cafe is the media partner for the upcoming CGX Montreal. So we will be on site. We will have a live cafe set up, hopefully grabbing folks like Ray for maybe a quick chat. But we'll also be at the Mentor Lounge that we mentioned, the VR panel. So if you're not able to attend and you were interested in some of what Ray was talking about today, you can follow us and we'll essentially be live tweeting. So you won't miss out. In the meantime, Ray, thanks again for your time. And yeah, I really appreciate you just sharing some of your insight and also some of what you're doing with Bendy, which is just really cool and exciting, I think, for the audience.
My pleasure. It's usually not too hard to get me to talk about sound, so.
Awesome. I know your weakness. Fantastic. Great. We will talk again soon. And for the rest of you watching, you can check this out on YouTube after the fact in case you turned in late. Also on GameDevCafe.com. Thanks very much. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. My pleasure. Bye.